The wild olive represents Gentiles. The cultivated olive represents Jews. So the image is of something somewhat similar, but not quite the same. The wild olive that gets grafted into something that has been carefully cultivated and cared for by the gardener. Now, I've heard horticulturalists try to tear this story apart with scientific tests and methods. Paul was not a horticulturist. He wasn't even a farmer, so far as we know. This passage was not intended as a lesson on proper tree grafting. It was merely a general word picture for use by people of an ancient world where most worked in agriculture at one task or another, and rudimentary grafting was in common use. Thus, continuing with agricultural terms, Paul warns that the wild olive derives a benefit from being grafted into that cultivated olive. It receives that same care and nourishment now that the cultivated olive receives, since the wild olive has been made artificially part of the cultivated olive. But the wild olive doesn't ever convert and become a cultivated olive. It doesn't replace the cultivated olive. And the wild olive should never think that it does. You with me? Therefore, using the grammatical technique called personification, assigning a human attribute to something that isn't human, the wild olive should not boast about its good fortune of getting attached to that cultivated olive tree. And especially it should not think that it can become better than the original, natural, cultivated olive tree. What's the main reason for the wild olive being cautioned to not get proud? Because the wild olive branches have been grafted in to where some of the natural branches of the cultivated tree were taken off. They were removed. And why were those cultivated olive branches removed from their own tree? Because they were found to have no trust. No trust. And clearly, since it is trust in Messiah's faithfulness that Paul has been preaching since chapter 1, this is what he's speaking about here. It's that trust. Therefore, if some wild olives, Gentiles, are grafted into the cultivated Jewish olive tree, they shouldn't expect a different treatment or a different outcome than the natural branches received. That is, the Gentile branches will stay attached. These believing Gentile branches will stay attached, but only so long as that trust remains sincere, active, and alive. The moment that trust ends, the wild olive branches, the wild Gentile believing olive branches, like the original cultivated branches, they're pruned off that tree by God and removed from their source of life and sustenance. There have been never-ending debates in theological circles about the roots of this cultivated olive tree and what they represent and what their nourishment is. It is usual in Christian circles to say that the roots are Jesus. Sorry, that just doesn't work for all kinds of reasons. First of all, the cultivated olive tree is clearly the Jewish people in general, not believers per se. Second of all, the natural branches of the tree that remain on the tree are believing Jews. But the trunk and the root system have always been Jewish, Hebrew. Third of all, the roots of the Jewish people are the patriarchs. But fourth, what makes the patriarchs is the covenant of Abraham. Without that covenant, there is no Father Abraham. Without that covenant, there is no line of promise to hand down to Isaac, for Isaac to hand down to Jacob. Without the Abrahamic covenant, there is no division of the world into Jews, or rather Hebrews, and Gentiles. It simply doesn't happen. And further, whenever Yeshua is described in the Bible from a horticultural perspective, he is not a root. He is a shoot or he is a vine. He himself has a root that he springs from. And Yeshua's root is Jacob. Through the tribe of Judah, the clan of Jesse, described in horticultural terms as Jesse the stump, and the family of King David. So here is the unmistakable theological principle that Paul makes, one that most of the institutional church has denied and hated for 1,800 years. Gentile believers, Christians, exist and are sustained spiritually only by being artificially attached to a strong Jewish source, itself fed from the covenant of Abraham. Israel's covenants with God are what makes Israel, Israel. And what makes Gentiles saved and forgiven is the goal of those same covenants. Yeshua, of the family of King David. Christ, the Jew.